As the fall federal election looms, the parties' different approaches to climate change are colliding this week on Parliament Hill. The Liberals have tabled a motion asking all MPs to recognize climate change as a, quote, real and urgent crisis driven by human activity.
Andrew Scheer doesn't have a climate plan. We do know that he's having secret meetings with oil lobbyists. I guess that's what the climate plan is. And, you know, folks want to go back. Conservative politicians talk about going back to coal.
The Conservatives are promising to release that climate plan soon, but also the NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has released part of his party's own motion, and it vows to follow guidelines from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. That group is calling for cutting emissions by half within a decade. Speaking to reporters, Singh also appeared to walk back support for a major LNG project in BC, which the Prime Minister took issue with in today's question period.
I believe the future of Canada does not include fracking. We cannot be fracking. We cannot be relying on fossil fuels to burn as an energy source at all in our country.
He just decided to stand against 10,000 good jobs for British Columbians by opposing the largest private sector investment in Canada's history with LNG Canada.
So what is the NDP's position on LNG, and how does it plan to cut emissions so steeply? And NDP leader Jagmeet Singh joins me now here in studio. Hi, Mr. Singh. Great to see you again.
Great to see you again, Vashi.
I want to talk about the motion that you introduced and you talked about yesterday. When you were talking about it, you said that if the NDP were to form government, the targets that government would set would be in line with what the IPCC report laid out. What does that mean tangibly? You know, by how much would the NDP aim to reduce carbon emissions below 2005 levels?
So firstly, just taking a step back, the reason why we're so motivated by the IPCC report is it lays out the gravity of the situation, the fact that we only have a limited amount of time before we're not just seeing climate change, but catastrophic climate change. And we see the impacts in flooding in Eastern Canada, in forest fires in Western Canada. There's some serious concerns, and families are struggling and being impacted by this. Canadians are being impacted. So taking it seriously means having ambitious and bold targets. So what we're proposing is a plan, and we'll have the details of that plan released later on, coming out soon. And that plan will lay out all the measures that we'll take. But our plan is to be in line with that vision of making sure we take a bold step in reducing emissions, and we'll have all those details coming forward.
I mean, I'm asking about those details because the election is on the horizon. You're saying you're going to be bold, you're going to be more aggressive, and I'm saying specifically, what does that mean? Because if you are in line with what the IPCC says, that's a 50% reduction versus the 30% target that Canada isn't even in line to meet. And that will sort of indicate to people what kind of policies you're about to pursue and how aggressive they are. So are you saying you're going to announce something like a reduction of 50%?
Yeah, our announcements can be very bold, but just to give you an idea of the way we're going to do it is the difference between our plan and many of other people who are talking about this is that we believe in defending the environment and fighting climate change in a way that doesn't leave any worker or community behind. So really our plan is going to lay out a number of measures that are going to create jobs. One example is the third largest greenhouse gas emitter in our country. In fact, one of the biggest emitters in the world are buildings and infrastructure. So one of our plans is a retrofit that's going to be 2050, replace all homes with a retrofit that'll reduce emissions. This will create jobs in communities, and it'll also make sure that we're doing our part to fight climate change and also help families save some costs because it'll reduce their energy costs.
But you won't say what your targets are going to be.
We are going to. We're going to release those details.
When are you? Because right now this sounds like when I interview Andrew Scheer about the same topic, right?
No,
those details are coming, but not yet.
Yeah, but we announced that we'd have our details out before the end of the session, and we're going to maintain that.
Okay, when it comes to what it will take to achieve that, obviously there's a big discussion right now and a debate around the carbon tax. I know you've said it's one part of your plan, and you've detailed just now another part of it. You're going to have a sort of multi-layer plan. But the carbon tax will obviously have to be a part of that. If you're going to achieve targets that are in line with what the IPCC has set out, the carbon tax, most experts agree, will have to go a lot higher. How much higher would an NDP government make that tax?
Well, the first thing we do for putting a price on pollution is acknowledging we've got to put a price because there is a cost to society. And the price that we put on pollution, first of all, should not be exempt from the biggest polluters. So one of our approaches to the plan will be...
So there'd be no exemptions for heavy emitters.
Right. We don't think that there should be an exemption on those who are producing the most emissions. How are we going to attain our goals if we're actually exempting, the Liberal plan is exempting the majority of the massive producers? that is not going to help us get in line with our goals. So one of the reasons why our plan is a better plan is because we're going to tackle those who are the biggest emitters. We're not going to give them a free ride like the Liberal government's proposing. That's going to get us in line with reducing emissions at the level that we need to.
What about consumers? Is that the only change that you would make, for example? Would the rebate system still exist in the way that it does? Would the price have to rise after 2022?
So in terms of the rebate system, we believe that there has to be some progressivity. Like, we can't be putting the burden on those who are already struggling, but we should be putting the responsibility on those who are contributing the most to pollution. So that's why our proposal will be in line with that vision. The idea of making sure the biggest polluters pay and those who are struggling, families that are in a tough position, aren't shouldering the burden. The way the Liberal plan basically puts the burden on everyday families without putting the burden on those who are actually producing the most pollution.
Didn't the PBO, though, say that actually those in the top quintile of earners would be the ones who don't get the money back, but the other, 4/5 of them would?
Well, the idea that the biggest emitters are exempt entirely, but families are not exempt entirely.
So would you exempt any families?
No, I'm saying that the idea is
Yeah.
that the Liberal plan, while there is a progressivity in it, it neglects the entire point of making sure that the biggest polluters pay. That's the big difference. We don't think that the application of this price on pollution should fall on families to get a rebate, which we believe it should be the biggest polluters that are also included. That's the big difference of what we're proposing.
So just so that I'm clear, would the plan stay the same for everyday families? It would include a rebate, but you would also not exempt heavy emitters.
Right. We would make sure that there's strong progressivity, so we're a rebate system to make sure that the amount that families that can afford, they're supported, and that they're not put in an onerous position, and that the biggest polluters are actually paying their fair share.
Would the price go up, and by how much after 2022?
Those details around how we're going to lay out our price on pollution will be included in our plan, which is coming out very soon.
You can't tell me if it's going to increase or not, and I'm asking you because there is a heavy political debate right now. I'm not just saying it randomly. You know what I mean? There is a big debate about how effective and is it the best way to combat this issue?
Well, it's not the only way, and I think that should be really clear.
That's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying even within the context
but I think
of
it should be clear.
measures.
That's why our focus is, for example, Trans Mountain Pipeline. The fact that the government purchased a pipeline and now it wants to build an additional pipeline, that's going to significantly increase our emissions. That is something that we don't believe in doing. We're firmly opposed to that project, and we're going to continue to fight it, and that's why it's in our motion.
But I'm asking you how expensive the carbon tax is going to get under an NDP government.
Well, I think under an NDP government, we're going to see a plan that's going to tackle, not just focus on one element of the debate, which is what the Liberals are focused on, which is not going to do enough. And that's actually shameful, that the fact that they're focused on one element that is not going to do what we need to do. And that's why our plan is going to have a retrofit. It's going to have a focus on making sure the biggest polluters pay. It's going to have a focus on making sure we have a broad approach to electrification of transportation, looking at ways for us to reduce emissions in buildings and other sources of greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not just a one weak solution that's not going to solve the problem. We've got a wholesome approach that's going to look at all the issues.
I take your point, but that doesn't answer the question about whether an NDP government would increase the carbon tax beyond 2022.
I don't think that the debate should be about one solution when we know that's not going to solve the problem. That's why I'm saying to you very clearly, we need to actually look beyond just a price on pollution and look at the other, focus on the other solutions. And that's why we've got to stop the Trans Mountain Pipeline. That is a massive contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. The Liberals want the debate to be just about a price on pollution, and the Conservatives want it to be about that as well. They both want to fight about that. That's not going to solve the problem. That debate is not helpful because there's so much more we need to do. And dwelling on this one point is not going to help us do what we need to do, what the IPCC has said we need to do, which is we've got to fight climate change in a meaningful way, and that's going to require a host of actions. That's what we're proposing, and we can't do it in a way that leaves workers or families behind. We're going to create jobs.
Speaking of those workers, do you support or some of them, do you support BC's LNG project? Well,
British Columbia's got one of the most ambitious climate change plans in North America. They've got an aggressive plan. My concern is that what we need to do is, we all know this, the future of energy in not just Canada but in the world has to be a future where we're not burning, we're not fracking, and we're not using fossil fuels. The energy has to be renewable. That's the future of Canada. And my focus is on, right now, we've got a project in front of us at the federal level, which is Trans Mountain Pipeline. That project cannot go ahead. We will not meet our targets if that project goes ahead. There's massive threat to the coast. massive concerns around tanker traffic of diluted bitumen, and if it spills that we can't clean it. And there's been serious concerns about Indigenous consultation. That's why I'm opposed to Trans Mountain.
That's a great answer for Trans Mountain, but I asked you about BC and LNG.
Well,
right?
BC's
do you support the project? And I'm asking you because you were asked repeatedly yesterday that question. You didn't answer it directly. I know you're talking about fracking. Fracking is part of that project. Do you support the development of that project that clearly the BC NDP do?
So the BC's got a great plan in terms of fighting climate change. They've got one of the best plans in the country. My focus is on what we can do at the federal level. And what we can do at the federal level is stop Mr. Trudeau, stop the Prime Minister from going ahead with a project which is going to exceed our emissions.
The Coastal Link pipeline?
And it's going to massively disrespect the Indigenous communities that are already raised their concern.
There is federal jurisdiction over the Coastal Link pipeline.
Right now, the project that's in the pipeline, that's not to be, no pun intended, the project that's moving, that right now the government's signaling that they're going to try to move ahead with, is a project that I'm focused on. We've got to stop this Trans Mountain project because this pipeline is massively concerning to the coastline. The Indigenous communities are fighting it in court, and they've won in court.
With respect, environmentalists say the same thing about the BC LNG project, that it's going to increase carbon emissions. There are Indigenous groups fighting that pipeline as well. In fact, there was, last time we had you on the show, you were talking about the Coastal Link pipeline and their opposition there. So the same concerns are being expressed about this project. You had months ago said that you supported it. You felt like it had done, that the government had consulted widely. Do you still support it?
BC's got a great plan to fight climate change. My concern is they don't have a partner at the federal level. You got a federal government, Mr. Trudeau and the federal Liberals, who are spending millions of dollars to give to Loblaws, that's a billionaire company. They're purchasing a pipeline and trying to build another pipeline. That's where I'm fighting. That's where I'm focusing on.
Okay, I tried. Thank you, Mr. Singh. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Power in Politics and the Power Panel with Stockwell Day, Dan Moulton, Françoise Boivin, and David Cochrane. Earlier in the show, I spoke with NDP leader Jagmeet Singh about his toughening stance on fossil fuels. I asked him several times if he supports BC's Coastal GasLink LNG pipeline as well as the larger LNG project. Here's how that went. Do you support BC's LNG project?
Well, British Columbia's got one of the most ambitious climate change plans in North America. They've got an aggressive plan. My concern is that what we need to do is, we all know this, the future of energy in not just Canada but in the world has to be a future where we're not burning, we're not fracking, and we're not using fossil fuels. The energy has to be renewable.
But I asked you about BC and LNG,
well,
right?
BC's
do you support the project? I know you're talking about fracking. Fracking is part of that project. Do you support the development of that project that clearly the BC NDP do?
So the BC's got a great plan in terms of fighting climate change. They've got one of the best plans in the country.
You had months ago said that you supported it. You felt like it had done, that the government had consulted widely. Do you still support it?
BC's got a great plan to fight climate change. My concern is they don't have a partner at the federal level. They're purchasing a pipeline and trying to build another pipeline. That's where I'm fighting. That's where I'm focusing on.
Okay, I tried. Thank you, Mr. Singh.
You did.
Like I said, I tried. So why what he said yesterday versus today, where he kind of shows an unwillingness to clearly state where he stands on the project? Françoise, I'll start with you. Yeah, it's all yours.
I'll be quite frank with you. I hate those type of answers so much.
I thought you were going to say questions. I was sorry.
Well, actually, he was skating around it. I mean, your questions could not be 3 times very clear. You supported it. Are you still supporting it? We all know BC's got a great, what was it, climate plan, climate change plan, environmental, but that's not what the people want to know. And it shows the problem with the NDP position right now. They have to, and of every party, political party, they have the same challenges. To say one thing in one part of the country and to say the same thing in another part of the country, especially on environment, especially on climate change and what you intend to do. So he's got BC who's going a certain way that is not pleasing. Everybody heard or read what Sven Robinson, who's on the most left, I'd say, activist of the party, challenging him less than a week ago. They come with a big motion on environment, climate change.
Declaring
Excellent.
an emergency.
But you know you're going to be asked the question you asked 3 times, and you don't have it. You can say, yes, I did say I was for it at the time, but I had time to talk with whatever and come up with some type of answer. Otherwise, people would just think you're not telling them the truth, or you're speaking on both sides of your mouth, and that's not helping the party. Definitely, if their challenge is the Green Party, who will come up with some type of platform, and they know they won't have any comeback, even if we would think their platform is not feasible, because people will not scrutinize the Green platform as much as the NDP platform. So they better put their act together.
How much of a bind is the NDP in right now when it comes to this project? As I said, he had expressed support before. Wow. But he had expressed in February support for the project. He had talked about the nature of the consultations, that they were wide, that they were, fully done with Indigenous people, and now, like Francois says, Sven Robinson is talking about what the Green victory in the last by-election means. What kind of bind does that put the NDP in?
Yeah, I think to quote the great philosopher Kermit the Frog, it's not easy being green, and as they found out, it's not easy beating Greens. And this is the huge problem that Jagmeet Singh and them have right now, is that the party that has always occupied the farthest left, most progressive flank of Canadian politics has someone that is hungry and moving and climbing and growing. And they have the difficulty after that resounding by-election defeat of reestablishing their green credentials in contrast with the Greens, which probably helps explain this move, but they're also the party of unions. And who works on LNG plants, and who digs pipeline trenches, and who builds those things? Tradespeople, journeymen and workers, many of which are unionized. And it puts them in this difficult spot of where they want to go on a values ideological thing, but who the practical voter base are. Right. But also we saw there, Vashi, there is a tendency with Jagmeet Singh at times not to give a very clear answer to a very clear question, like, who do you support in Venezuela? That is a question for the people of Venezuela. He was asked repeatedly to pick a side between Guaido and Maduro, and he kept repeating that is for the people of Venezuela. So you get sort of stuck in this message track thing that may work in a clip, but in a sit-down interview where you can cycle back to it, it looks evasive. And that's the situation he's got there, because he's getting squeezed on both sides by Liberals and Greens, and he's getting eroded on both flanks.
Stock, from a strategic perspective, Brad Levine, for example, was on the show yesterday, and obviously he's coming from a point of view, but he was saying don't overstate the by-election win. First of all, it's a by-election. Second of all, we saw the NDP and the Liberals really bleed votes. The Greens picked up about 1,000 votes to win that by-election. So a lot of people stayed home. Is there a risk in reading too much into that for the NDP and doing what they did today?
No, I think they've got to read everything into it that's possible there.
Agreed.
Mr. Singh shows. I feel a bit badly for him because, as I said a couple times on the show, after his own by-election win, it seemed like he was finding his footing and getting a little sure of himself. And I commend you on your line of questioning to him. You were respectful, but we could sense the frustration there. And I think someone needs to tell him that it's okay to take a tough position. I don't care if it's left or right. Yeah. It's actually okay. And people will go yay or nay, but when you waffle on both sides, you're going to lose both sides. What he's doing here, he's trying to straddle far enough to capture what could be the emerging Greens, but he's trying to out-green them, and you can't do that. They're taking the same approach as in the U.S. with the far left on the so-called Green New Deal, and people, when they listen to that, shut down all fossil fuels. Don't help the rest of the world get off of coal by selling our good LNG to them. These type of things, it's really going to hurt them. You can't out-green those Greens. And they're being unrealistic. He's being unrealistic by trying to be seen as green as they are. It's not going to work for him.
Dan, you're nodding in agreement.
I am completely in agreement there. I think looking at that clip, you just sort of think, what a way to blow another moment, right? I mean, consistently, he's given these opportunities to take a position on an issue that I don't think is a hard one to take a position on. You're either in favor of what it will be the largest investment by a private company in Canada's history, create 10,000 jobs in British Columbia with this LNG Canada facility. You're either on the side of that, or you're taking a clear position in favor of the environment. And if that's what he wants to do, and he wants to outflank the Greens and maybe win the next by-election that happens in British Columbia, that's one thing. But he's not taking that position, and he's clearly not thinking about the election. He has to think longer term here and be a bit more strategic about how he's positioning his party, a party that traditionally has bold, clear ideas in the coming election. Their party is rudderless right now. They have no environment plan, they have no plan for the economy, and it's all the more clear to
Although, to be fair, I mean, this came after a line of questioning yesterday when they introduced a motion calling for the House to declare an emergency, a climate emergency, and he, in that announcement, talked about more aggressive targets. He also wouldn't be completely specific about what those targets would be, but they would be more in line with the IPCC. So he is saying, some specifics about what they're going to do, and he says more are coming before the end of the session. But I take your point that.
Yeah, but I mean, that's in the House, right? That's one thing. He had an opportunity here on your platform to be really clear about this issue, talk about his climate plan, not British Columbia's province's climate plan. And by the way, the NDP in that province are supportive of the LNG project.
Well, very supportive. Yeah, you
yes,
got to wonder how this.
Exactly.
I was just going to say, after watching what happened with Rachel Notley and Jagmeet Singh, after the TMX stuff, and now John Horgan was an ally. I wonder if this will impact that at all.
Authenticity matters in politics too, right? And like to compare him again with the Greens, Elizabeth May, whether you agree with her or not, she's authentic in what she believes and she knows her stuff.
She's convincing.
And yeah, she can give you answers on her policies to the 5th decimal point. You couldn't get a yes or a no there, and that is a challenge. When people are looking for sincere people in politics, whether you like Trump or not, people think he's authentic, and that works for him. And this looked evasive rather than principled.
And my take, though, is that he made his first mistake on that topic last week when he admitted, like the Liberals, that it was a vote on environment solely. The party could have spun it so more differently. They could have said it was a really judgment on the government and put it solely on the Trudeau government and say that's what the people were voting because we're pretty much the same Greens and they decided to go and show change and do like they did in PEI in New Brunswick and tone it down. But by coming so directly and giving the victory to the Greens and saying, it's rare that we admit in politics that, hey, congrats, you won, you beat me. I'm so happy, congratulations, we'll find explanation and so on. But they definitely did exactly the same thing as the Liberals did and said, hey, bravo, Green, you won on environment. So, and then they rush 1 week later after, like I said, Sven Robinson writes something that was, if I was the leader, I'd say, am I really the leader or is he the leader? Who's leading that party? And he comes out with his motion, which I think is nice with the points. We're starting to see something that he will give to his supporters, something to run for. Because right now I talk to a lot of my ex-colleagues who intend to maybe run again, and they just don't know what the party is standing for right now.
Interesting. Okay, I have to leave it there, but thank you very much to the Power Panel this evening. Thanks to Stockwell Day, Dan Moulton, Françoise Boivin, and David Cochran. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.